So how do you think about that when it comes to employing humor, particularly in the social vein where it can be tricky
Yeah.
to do?
Yeah, because it's a tough one, right? Because something that's funny to you may not land with me. And I think first it starts with this brand and what does that brand stand for? So really being clear on the foundations of a brand, its tone, its principles, and what it also does not stand for helps, right? It's
Mm.
our North Star to guide us, I think is what a brand needs foundationally to be successful with or without humor. And so once you have that foundation, I think the next step is understanding kind of that creator that you're working with and the humor that resonates for their audience.
Welcome back to Generation Influence, a podcast focused on the movers and shakers behind the scenes of influencer marketing and e-commerce. This week, we are privileged to have Tiffany Pegues, the head of social, search, and CRM at Church and Dwight Company. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So excited to have you. Let's start by having you tell us a bit about your career path, including how a Stanford graduate in management, science, and engineering ends up in brand management.
Yeah. So I think to tell this story, we have to go way back to high school. And I actually went to a high school that was 100% focused on math and science. We were groomed to be, I guess, the future engineering and math leaders of the world. So lots of prolific doctors came out of my high school in particular. And so that carried its way through my matriculation to Stanford. And I said, okay, I'm here. I'm going to be an engineer. So I took, a year of engineering courses and was able to get an internship actually in chemical engineering. And no offense to any chemical engineering undergrads who may be listening, but it just wasn't for me. And so I said, there must be more. And so I went back to campus and said, okay, I don't want to throw out this year of engineering courses that I've took, but what else can I do? And at the time, there was a very new major. So I'm dating myself, and it was called Management Science and Engineering. And it was really looking at the intersection of business and science and human-centered relationships with technology and humans really at the core. So that's where I went. And what's really been interesting is seeing the progression of really being human centered. So after undergrad, I started in consulting. So thinking about people in particular and how do we optimize, the way people work and the projects that they're working on. And then I went to business school and I found my way oddly into marketing. But I think it all makes sense because really marketing to me is about reaching that consumer and really, having compelling messaging to drive demand with those consumers. So it all hangs together in some way for me.
I mean, it really does. And so now we know you're the one who's bringing all this math into the marketing field, but that is
Or
that
marketing
exactly,
math.
yes,
As our
marketing
CFO
math.
would say, marketing math.
It is it is it is quite the transition. And I feel like there's a lot of trends and themes there too, the way economics has evolved. And so, you're very much down this path that trying to bring these sort of quantitative principles to human behavior, which is kind of messy. And so, so that's fun and fascinating. One of the things that you said to me in our initial setup interview was that you approach social with the attitude that there's no free pass. We're going to move some cases here. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. I'm not sure. It feels like maybe partly that's the mathematician in you saying, this is going to be quantifiable. This is something we're going to drive toward a numerical outcome, but I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it. But to talk to me about that discipline you bring, where even in social, where a lot of people are happy if they just get some likes, you're like, no. Let's talk about the quantitative impact.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is for me, It really is about how do I showcase in anything I'm working on truly the consumer value and the business value and that kind of coming together.
Mm.
So really, I think that social can be powerful because if you think about it, back when I first started in marketing, it was about this virtuous funnel where you went from awareness and then there was the mid funnel consideration. And then eventually a few things happened to get you to conversion. And what I love about being a marketer is that it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, and you can leverage social. A social post can drive someone from that initial awareness to the conversion in one fell swoop. And so, because of that, it's really important for me to really try to demonstrate that impact that you can have. And so, I talk sometimes about social as the third shelf, which ties into this principle of the nonlinear funnel. And how do we track it to ultimately drive the business results? Because we move the consumer to action. And so this is where when I set up my annual KPIs, they are rooted in making sure there's some kind of trackable element of did we move the needle from a case perspective. So we like to use, right now we're using clicks to retail, right? But I want to go even deeper to figure out that true attribution. And so working with some of my partners to do that now on some of our brands.
Wow. All right. So that is absolutely pulling it all the way through. And I love this idea of the third shelf. Are there elements of when you say this third shelf, social is the third shelf, are you literally visualizing or trying to revisualize social through the idea that someone's looking at a product page or someone is in store looking at a product? Is that part of that analogy, or are there other elements to it that you can expand on?
Yeah, so what's interesting is I think about, the past, how my mother she loves being in the grocery stores, for instance, is like her favorite thing to do is scan the aisles, right? And so for her, discovery really took place with the physical world, that tangible shelf set. And so when I say social as the third shelf, I think about it as offering up discovery truly at its core and discovery that can drive an action, whether it's sharing with someone or whether it's pushing the shop now button, or to your point, whether it's just learning more and perusing it. So, social as the third shelf really means about giving the consumer all the information at their disposal, to do something more with what you're serving.
I love it. I want to come back to this idea, your mother in the grocery store and the joy of shopping, which is something I think we've gotten away from, but we got a topic later where I think that's going to come back up. So stay tuned, everyone. I'm really excited to circle back to that. I do want to talk about something that I think, a lot of people think are in conflict. And I'm going to say it this way. You're talking a lot about using social in this very product informative kind of way. And I think that makes some people nervous that they feel like that's going to be in conflict with this idea that social should be very authentic, right? And it shouldn't feel like an infomercial. And so how do you bring those two together? Because I know from talking to you that authenticity is critical. And so how are you doing authenticity while still delivering your product, not just your brand, but your product message?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think it starts with that red thread I talked about earlier, and that's that human connection. So it's about first starting with your brand, what the brand stands for, and then creators who could really help reinforce that message and reach audiences in an authentic way. The other piece of it is once you've found others who can help you tell the story, um, it's making sure we don't get into buzzword bingo, right? We love, marketers love some, good selling points that we've gotten blessed and approved by legal. And it's really important to me to make sure that we don't get overwhelmed by the talking points, but more so leverage them in a way that's authentic to those humans that we just talked about. So once we have those talking points, those selling points, how do we leverage them and work with our influencer partners to leverage them in the way that makes sense for the products, but also the audiences we're trying to reach? And then finally, ultimately, is about being the mirror to the consumer experience. So putting it in words and using situations and context that mirror, how our humans would approach the product or the good or the service that we're trying to market. Really, at the end of the day, for me, it's about putting people first as we're thinking about it. And I'm not afraid to raise my hand and be like, oh man, that sounds too corporate, right? How do we say it in a way that really takes advantage of what people want to see or how they would share it with someone else, right? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to drive that flywheel of advocacy. And to do that, we also have to help people give, speaking points that would help them share it with others as well. And so really a cornerstone to a lot of the content that we create with our brands is within influencer programs. And that's how we met you, Bill, and your great company, because we're leveraging influencers to tell authentic stories that resonate, and you can resonate while still selling products. So I think about, our recent Meta case study we've been so fortunate to get, and it was about leveraging the power of influencers with infotainment. So, right, to showcase a portfolio of products actually and how to use them. And when we were able to do a measurement study attached to that creative, what we saw is that the ROAS was 12 times that of some of our traditional tools. So I really do think if you kind of lead with that consumer focused approach, you will get to authentic storytelling messages.
Yeah, that was a great case study. We will drop a link in the description down below so that everybody can check out that case study, because that was a wonderful program. And why don't we dive into one of the elements that was in that program a little bit more deeply, and that was the use of humor, right? So humor is one of those things that can either really endear a consumer to a brand, but doesn't necessarily drive sales. And so how do you think about that when it comes to employing humor, particularly in the social vein where it can be tricky
Yeah.
to do?
Yeah, because it's a tough one, right? Because something that's funny to you may not land with me. And I think first it starts with this brand and what does that brand stand for? So really being clear on the foundations of a brand, its tone, its principles, and what it also does not stand for helps, right? It's
Mm.
our North Star to guide us, I think is what a brand needs foundationally to be successful, with or without humor. And so once you have that foundation, I think the next step is understanding kind of that creator that you're working with and the humor that resonates for their audience. So marrying the brands with the kind of consumer driven lens of the audiences we're trying to reach and what resonates with that particular audience. And oftentimes, the best relationships are when, I just think of a recent example, are when, let's say, you as the brand team have a vision for some kind of content, the creator actually comes back to you and they say, that I don't know if that really works for my audience. How about this? And you can collaborate and co-create something that makes more sense. Again, I cannot say this enough. It's about being kind of consumer led and driven. That creator really understands their audience. So I think we do have to listen and prepare to pivot in a way that still makes sense for the brand, but also, helps get the point across most effectively. And that can be with humor. So we shouldn't shy away from it. Because I'll tell you what, one thing, Bill, about that program is there were some conversations internally, right? Of like, oh, is this too silly? Is this like what? Right. And so sometimes it doesn't land with everyone the same way. So I'm really proud that we were able to showcase how kind of this fun, lighthearted content could marry with the brand's values and DNAs and with the creators and their audiences to really create some powerful content.
Yeah, it's great. I love the way you talk about how it's got to be humor that works both for the influencer and for the brand, and that brands themselves have their own personalities and their own sort of aesthetic. And so while a type of humor might be perfect for one brand, it might be completely off for another brand. And so we have to think through how do we understand the brand itself and whether or not that, contextually it's going to be appropriate there. So that is super helpful. So everybody has their own definition of social commerce. Turns out I really like your definition. Can you share how you define social commerce? And then I'm just gonna stand behind you and say what she said, because again, I think it's spot on.
Well, Bill, you probably have to fill me in because, yeah, I talk so much. Who knows when I'll reincarnate in this telling of social commerce. So, okay, so at its essence, what is social commerce? It's using social to sell. I think when social commerce is at its most powerful, it is again taking you from that awareness to discovery to conversion all in one fell sweep. So it's really dynamic and it's really driving advocacy above and beyond just like that initial click. It's really driving the flywheel for your brand. So if I think about when I've connected with my colleagues in Asia and we think about social commerce in their markets versus in the US, we have some very foundational differences, right? I think about some of the stories they've told me, and it's kind of a buffet there of social commerce options, whereas here it's kind of a dessert. We're still like understanding, is it permissible enough for us? And I think there are a few big things that are in our way of really having it as the full buffet, in that, there in a lot of Asian countries, the social platform and the retailer are one and of the same,
Mhm.
right? So there's a power in that because it's making a more frictionless experience, right? You can go from that awareness to that click, and within that, there's 3-hour fulfillment. So we talk about 2-day shipping here or overnight fulfillment. But what if you could have an experience such that someone is riding their bike in 2 hours to deliver you the product you ordered, or even 30 minutes. And so for me, I think our industry hurdle is how do we take the friction out of the experience to truly drive social as a tool for consumers to purchase the goods and services that they desire.
That's great. Yeah, I love this emphasis you've got on the infrastructure side of live streaming. And it's interesting because literally yesterday I was at a conference and live streaming came up. And the statistic that they threw out was that on Chinese sites, e-commerce sites, they have 10 times the dwell time of an Amazon or a Walmart in the States. And the attribute that they sort of tied into that, or maybe the attribute I took away, was that there was this sort of joy of shopping. And I thought it was so mind blowing because I feel like in the States, we have this self perception that we are this, mass consumer society and we're so materialistic and that we consume, 10 times as much per capita as anyone else. And we should stop being that way. And, and so I sort of feel like for a lot of us, it's kind of taken the joy out of shopping, and we're supposed to be treating it as this very efficient, functional kind of thing. Yet here we have a statistic like that they're spending 10 times as much going through the shopping process, clearly not buying 10 times as much stuff though. And you talked about your mom and the joy of shopping even in the grocery store. And so I wonder, do you think there's anything to that? Is there some balance where shopping is almost become a guilty pleasure, or is it returning now that we've taken the friction out? Can it return to just being a joyful thing? Like, how do you feel like we are mentally in terms of enjoying shopping and the process and the research and everything else? Where are we, and is that part of the key to unlocking live streaming and more social commerce in the States?
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that when I think about experiences that are truly enjoyable, oftentimes there's a community element into it. And if we think about this, rise of micro influencers, is because they're building this truly authentic community where you don't feel like a number, one of the many, maybe who follow macro influencers. So what's interesting to me is thinking about how do we as marketers help our brands be a part of communities and reach those niches. In fact, someone told me it's the riches in the niches right now. And so how do we tap into those in an authentic way where everyone feels that it's beyond just kind of this corporate greed type element, right? Because there can be something so satisfying and empowering when you find your tribe and when you're sharing new ideas or information with those folks. And they can also happen to be brands or products or goods or services. So there is something there. And I think about what we're trying to do with a lot of our PDPs even, is to build more rich content on them, which oftentimes can come from influencers. So that, yes, it could be something very tactical, like a product display page, but how do you embed a lot of those rich resources that build the advocacy and that flywheel for them to want to share with others? So helping others find a tribe with your brands as well.
I mean, it's right there in the name, social commerce, but I think I have underestimated the power of community as
Mhm.
one of the critical dynamics here. And by the way, for anyone who is interested going deeper on live streaming and thinking about all these different levers that are going to go into live streaming, eventually taking off in the States, in the Vivek Rastogi podcast episode, he talked some more about some of the social dynamics in Asia that that he believes has led to live streaming taking off earlier there than it has here. So we're starting to build some great insights and library of thinking here on what it's going to take for live streaming to take off, and I love that. All right.
And then one provocative thing, Bill, is
Yeah.
maybe it'll look completely different though here in the US. So sometimes I think I underestimate we're global economy, but at the same time, we have our unique nuances here and there. And so, we've tried some efforts in the live streaming space in particular, and we're still not quite there, right? I talked about the KPIs I always try to keep in mind. So maybe we have to think differently. And what I think thinking differently really will be is removing the friction in the experience more so
Mm.
that it's seamless and you can quickly get to community. So I don't know what that means exactly and how it tactically unfolds. But as I think about some of the bets I want to place in social commerce, it's around removing the friction, the barriers within the experience, as well as helping others connect with others from a community perspective.
That's great. I totally hear you, and I love having some clues as to where to look to where success might arise from. All right. Well, last one, and hopefully a fun one. I wanted to ask you, who's been the best mentor or mentors, if you want to name more than one, or guide for you in your career, and what in particular did you learn from them that was so meaningful?
Ooh, this is an interesting one because I have so many. Okay. So I'll start actually with a cross-functional that I had the pleasure of working with. So I had the pleasure of working with someone who I consider truly a Renaissance woman. I call her the mayor, unofficial mayor of Bentonville. She also owns a farm, fun fact, that she sells commercially chickens and cows.
This is
Right?
not where I thought this is going.
Yeah, but what Debbie taught me is it's infamous in that there's the first step in getting a yes is to get a no,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that's really powerful. And what that means to me is not that you try to railroad people or things to fit your agenda, but figure out what led to the no to get to the yes.
I
I'll
love that.
start there because I think she's just so profound. I love everything about her. And she comes from a very different background, right? In terms of sales and farmer. I'm a city girl, not sales.
That
But I think that's just so powerful.
that is super powerful. What now? Wait, I might have missed it. Debbie's last name?
Hi, Debbie. Debbie Alsop. Love you. I did want to just shout out something too. I learned a lot actually from a lot of my direct reports. And I'm really fortunate that I get to continue to work with a few of them in different ways. And I think what's really important for me from that perspective is how they've helped me figure out how to be a mirror. So we can talk about that in the lens of from a consumer facing perspective, but also in the mirror of like, how do you want to show up? Who do you want to be in the eyes of others? And so I think that's a profound life lesson, but also a profound marketer's lesson. And if we truly have a mirror up to ourselves and our brands from the consumer's perspective, what can we learn? And if we truly have a lens up from kind of the future of our industry, what can we learn as well?
Oh my goodness. I love that. All right. Give us a couple of names. Let's shout
Oh my goodness.
some
So
out.
let's shout out Maggie Piot, the current folks that I get the pleasure of working with every day, Corey West, Jill Weiner, Diane Zaid, Don Puskas, Kristen Kowalski. There's so many, so many.
Oh my gosh. That is a great list. I will tell you, I know for a fact, they are going to be so pleased to have those call outs. That means so much. Obviously, to have your boss or somebody you work with on a project who's senior say something like that, even privately means a bunch. So to say it public is great. Well, this has been awesome, Tiffany. It has been great getting to know you. You have opened my mind in so many areas. We really, really appreciate you being on the show and sharing your time with us. Again, we'll drop the link to that case study because, again, other marketers can definitely learn from what you executed there. And for everybody else, we will see you next time on Generation Influence. Thanks again, Tiffany.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Generation Influence drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check us out and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can find information on next week's guest in the description below. Hope to see you then and there.